Toxic masculinity seems to have been completely misunderstood by online reactionaries. Back during 2016 YouTube, the Dark Ages, if you listened to these people back then, you would think that toxic masculinity means that masculinity itself is toxic. And this narrative fit very conveniently into this whole Gamergate era capital G gamers and skeptics fighting against the evil feminists who are trying to take away our masculinity because they think all men are sexist, and so they have this term called toxic masculinity, which means that all men are evil sexists and we should get rid of masculinity. You get the idea. But, surprise surprise, this is not true. Toxic masculinity does not mean that masculinity is toxic, and it's actually a pro-male term. Discussions about toxic masculinity are very helpful to men. Now, how does this work? For example, lots of boys are told that they should keep their feelings down. If they have suffered an emotional hurt, they should not be sharing it with anyone, and they certainly shouldn't cry. But why? In ancient Greece, public displays of emotions were considered a manly thing. Shedding tears publicly was considered to be authentic and courageous, or, alpha, to use modern terminology. Teaching young boys to just bottle up their feelings and cut themselves off from any sort of emotional support network is a very harmful practice, and an example of toxic masculinity. Another example is the normalization of violence among young boys. Do we remember that Gillette ad? The one that caused a collective mental breakdown among reactionaries a few years ago? In it, there's this very creative visual of a bunch of dads standing with their grills in a row, going, "Boys will be boys," as two kids scuffle with each other on the lawn. This scene is meant to reflect on the fact that we normalize violence among boys. And of course, a friendly scuffle between two kids is not the issue. It's all this additional baggage of, boys and men, sometimes they just need to go at each other, to live out their masculine side, to unleash the beast within. Yeah, and then bullying happens. So is bullying a good thing? Hey, the bully just unleashed the beast within. He's just living out his masculine essence. It's not his fault that the kid he's bullying is too much of a pussy to retaliate. Stuff like this is also toxic masculinity. The third example would be a fetishization of self-reliance. Not only are boys taught to just bottle up their feelings, they are also told that asking for help is a feminine thing. Like if a man is driving somewhere and gets lost and so asks for help, that is emasculating. But why though? Some people would make an argument like, back in the ancient days, men were the rugged hunters roaming the plains, and so not asking for directions on the way to McDonald's is an expression of this ancient male virtue. But the thing is, I can do the reverse and say, hey, in the ancient era, hunting was a very dangerous business and men did it in groups. Therefore, it is natural for men to ask for help. When they get lost on the way to McDonald's, they immediately pull over and ask the first person for help, which is an expression of this ancient masculine virtue. So yeah, the fetishization of self-reliance is also toxic masculinity. And when you combine these three things, bottling up your emotions, normalizing physical violence, and fetishizing self-reliance, you get a high male suicide rate, battered husbands who don't ask for help, domestic abuse shelters that are available only for women, boys emotionally scarred by bullying, or male domestic abuse victims who get ridiculed and laughed at when they try to ask for help. All of this results from toxic masculinity. It doesn't mean that masculinity is toxic. It means that we have some very harmful and, toxic ideas about what masculinity should be, and that we should work against those things. Feminists who bring up the issue of toxic masculinity try to help men. And I find the irony astounding that they get harangued by these capital G gamers and capital S skeptics, because first off, they agree on the problem, so they should be natural allies, and second, how fragile do you have to be, how unsure you have to be in your masculinity for a razor company's YouTube ad to cause this big of a freak out. Masculinity is not a bad thing. The fact that we have all these harmful and toxic ideas about what masculinity should be is a bad thing. It results in bad outcomes and in general decreases the well-being of men. And so I am against it. I want people to be happy. I want men to be happy. And so I don't purposefully misunderstand feminist terms meant to help men. So this is the idea behind toxic masculinity. I hope you've enjoyed the content, and in the meantime, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon, so if you think this kind of content is worth your time, please consider supporting me in doing just that.